Yeah, let me go ahead and just kind of touch on why I'm talking about interdisciplinary care. With being our practice the way that it is, it's general practice. We have, several days of hygiene, but we do see a lot of complex care come through our door. And so in order for us to be successful on that, we really have to work with a lot of different specialties and moving parts. And this has been kind of a work in progress. What I do today is much different than what I did, 5 years ago, and it'll probably be different 5 years from now. So kind of how I heard people talking about they're interested to see how other people do it. Well, this is kind of the framework how I do it now. And I want to make sure that you do know that this is all kind of real world stuff. Unfortunately, the science and the CE circuit now is full of marketing and kind of biased opinions going around. And they make everything look like it's a Hollywood movie. But I commit to you that I will make sure I don't show any podium prosthodontics. If you see anything that you challenge or you want to know more about it, I encourage you to break etiquette maybe and just call out and say, hey, that doesn't look right to me, or when I do it, it doesn't work out that way. Because there's a lot of things that that come from very small steps, and we'll kind of touch on these along the way. I do have to apologize. I didn't realize that there's going to be 4 orthodontists here. I would have kind of tailored this a little differently. But this is definitely from a restorative aspect and looking out that way. So I would love the feedback from everybody else, either at the end or throughout the presentation, to hear the way that you think about things. So just about every modern presentation has to start with this guy, Simon Sinek, and he popularized the begin with a why. So obviously we're all here and we have to figure out why the patients are seeking the treatment in the first place, and then why would you involve multiple specialists to care for your patients, and then why should you even be spending time. I'm sure everybody's had a long week with lots of stresses, and why should you be spending your time, money, and effort to be learning how to do interdisciplinary care more? Well, we're going to answer that, but before we do that, we have to touch on the what and the who. So I'm just going to start off with the terminology very quickly. So multidisciplinary versus interdisciplinary. And when I'm trying to think of concepts, the best way that I do it is just think in pictures. So I envision a barrier reef with lots of different fish running away and a lot of energy, a lot of movement. There's definitely a lot going on in this picture here. And that represents to me multidisciplinary care, where this picture here, it definitely starts to have a purpose, and you zoom out far enough, and this does look like its own organism, and it all has one singular purpose. But the sharing part of both of these pictures is they're made up of the same basic unit, which is a fish with its own mind, its own eyes, its own fins. It can do whatever it wants. And that's kind of the world that we're in right now, at least in dentistry and interdisciplinary care. So I'm hoping to create a framework and illustrate the way I think about interdisciplinary care so that we can all kind of start swimming in the same purpose together. So let's make things nice and simple and look at kind of the ideal schematic of what we're doing. Now, again, this is going to be biased against for me being a restorative person. So I put myself at the top as the driver. There's the specialties, and I'm going to touch on lab support. I did take that a significant amount of this talk out of the lab support part, but if you do want to talk about it or a little bit later on or at a different time, I'm happy to go into that. I just didn't think that many people restoratively wanted to talk about that, but we'll see about it. So hopefully all of these groups are all talking to each other and all in the hopes of caring for the patient. And so this is going to be kind of the schematic that we're building off of. Now it doesn't actually have to be this way. There's the famous trio of Frank Spear, Vince Kokich, and Dave Matthews, and their schematic actually looked more like this. If you listen to the lectures that they talk about at the Spear Institute, Vince Kokich was actually the driver of a lot of the cases, and it worked very well. So just because I have the way that I like to work doesn't mean that it has to be that way. Now sometimes we're doing a brand new procedure, or we just kind of decide that we're going to not put too much control into it, and then we change the schematic to something like this, where the lab will be kind of dictating what happens. While this is, real life, and this does happen sometimes, I would caution you against it, just because ultimately the lab, even if they have tons of experience, they don't have any of the liability. They don't get to see the long-term effects of what works and what doesn't. So again, I would probably advocate to not have something like this. And then throughout everybody's career, you've probably run into this issue where the patient really is dictating the treatment and telling everybody what to do. So again, you start to have some challenges in communication and working together when you don't establish the hierarchy or the way that you're going to work together with your team. Now we're going to modify that initial schematic again, because right now, you do have the ability to do a lot of training and start to combine some of these different bubbles. So if you learn your own surgery, if you start to do a lot of your own orthodontic movements, things like that, you could simplify the schematic and create a different arrangement. Now, some people are also, getting into doing their own lab work, doing CEREC dentistry, and you can further compress this schematic, and then that does have the benefit of cutting down on the amount of communication that needs to happen. Now, before everybody runs out and become a super dentist, general dentist, and does everything, you have to kind of look at lessons from around us. So if you look at Denny's, you'll see this is just a little bit of their menu. And you can get anything from breakfast to a steak, but most of these are not the best of whatever you're ordering. So you start to put too much up there and you can get into trouble. So alternatively, here's In-N-Out's menu. And I would argue that this model is working probably better and more lucratively than the Denny's model. And then the argument could be made, well, I'm doing it and it's better for me and the patient and things are working great. Well, that argument falls apart a little bit, because then really you should be doing your own scheduling, because you know how much time that particular patient's going to be needing. And so you really should be doing your own scheduling. And then nobody really cares about your practice more than you, so you probably should be doing your own accounting. And then, you know what, we're all very detail-oriented people, so maybe we should be doing our own cleaning and janitorial work, and then pretty soon we're all going to just be crying on the floor and not enjoying life. So, what we have to do is listen to the lessons of the past. And Marcus Aurelius did say it a long time ago, if you do seek tranquility, to do less, but do it well, is basically the thought. So in summary of the last 9 minutes, the key takeaway from this is to kind of know and establish your dynamic of your team, know who you're working with, and hopefully, ultimately, you're working for a synergistic collaboration, so you're more than just the sum of your parts. Okay. So what does this look like actually? So that's a lot of kind of philosophical stuff, but as a restorative dentist, we get into this stuff all the time. Initially, it's just the restorative dentist and the patient doing a direct composite. Now, we're going to go ahead and ignore some of the complexities that it goes into running an office with all the scheduling and all of the interaction that happens behind the scenes. So each one of these nodes that we're talking about has some extra nodes, and it gets pretty complex, as everybody here well knows. But let's just keep it simple moving forward. So pretty much a direct composite. It's a two person system. But when you kind of go to the next level, to an indirect restoration, then you have to bring in a lab support. I mean, unless you're doing your own lab work. And so you have to start to work on the communication between the lab and the patient. And sometimes when it makes sense, like custom shades, you have the lab talk to the patient and go back and forth this way. And there are many ways to communicate with the lab, but we could go into that later if it's interesting to the group. So to further make things more complex, we can talk about implant dentistry. Now we're really getting into kind of a spider web of personalities, of offices, and we have to be purposeful on the way that we are designing things. So here now we have the surgical aspect of the treatment and how we're going to discuss that. And then finally, you get to kind of the really complex interdisciplinary care, which I hear everybody wanting to hear more about and how to do it and how everybody manages pitfalls. But there is another level that you have to spend time and have documentation and talk to other specialties. And sometimes they're not even dental specialties. We're working more and more with ear, nose, and throat colleagues, psychologists, psychiatrists, and sleep labs, neurologists, things like that. So when you start working outside of the realm of dentistry, it does get even more challenging. So, and I'd like to make sure that we're not complicating number of teeth with complex care. So something like this, you're touching every single tooth. But luckily, the schematic of this is pretty straightforward, where we have this patient who is referred in for only one tooth, just the front tooth number 8. And because there was surgery involved, there's orthodontics involved, some unfortunately complex lab work to be done, and they were referred in from another restorative dentist, this one tooth became very, very complex with a very challenging network to go through. Okay, so hopefully this starts to help us answer some of the whys. So why is the patient seeking treatment in the first place? We always have to understand that this is what our main goal is trying to be. So the patient is trying to get better in some sort of way, which means functionally they're having problems eating, speaking, they don't like how they look, or they have some pain in some of the way. So you have to make sure that everything kind of comes back to the patient's why. Now, why would you even put a lot of specialists together and deal with the communication that goes into it? Well, like we were talking about, you can spend as much time improving yourself in one aspect or a few aspects of treatment, and then you can potentially have the best care for that one patient. Then you can also enjoy your life and do the things that you like to do and are good at. And then there's also a sense of camaraderie and that you get to be social with the people in the team, and it just makes it more fun to do dentistry. So why should you be here? Well, I would argue you're already doing it, so you might as well do it faster, do it more efficient, and enjoy yourself doing it. And then I'm sure everybody's the same way, but I love to control things, and if you don't just decide which of those schemes you're going to have, you're going to end up with one anyway. So I'd rather pick the right one. So that's just talking about the why. So the more important question now that we've answered that is the how. Okay. What we should do every once in a while is kind of step out from dentistry and see what history tells us or what the world around us says. So this here is Michelangelo, and what he was thinking is when he was doing these wonderful sculptures is he would look at the block of marble and envision that there's actually the final sculpture in place, and he would just knock off what just didn't belong there. Walt Disney made a movie, and they put it this way.
I wonder which way I ought to go. Lose something? Oh, well, I was I mean, I was just wondering. Oh, that's quite all right. One moment, please. Why, you're a cat. A Cheshire cat. Oh, love me, Missy. Oh, wait! Don't go, please! I just wanted to ask you which way I ought to go. Well, that depends on where you want to get to. Oh, it really doesn't matter. As long as I can... Then it really doesn't matter which way you go.
So that kind of resonates in my mind when people start to ask, well, what should we do? And then really, I think it was summed up pretty well by Stephen Covey when he said, begin with the end in mind, and the 7 habits of highly effective people. So really, another key takeaway for doing interdisciplinary care is to begin where you want to end. And then the how to get there is worked backwards and filling in the pieces. So from here on out, I promise you there's going to be more teeth, more dentistry, less pictures and cartoons. So when these patients walk into our offices, everybody sees some pretty challenging smiles. But what we should be doing is thinking, okay, this is where we're going to get them to, and then working backwards, trying to fill in how we're going to get there. So for the top patient there, the majority of their problem, or the main parts of their problems, are the shape and the shade and a bit of the position. And once you do your evaluation, you'll find out that there's some functional issues. But truly, it's more of just making the teeth look better and getting them in the right spot. And so I'm going to be really heavily relying on lab support. And then personally, I actually have people say, well, who does your crown and bridge work? Or you say, well, what tooth? And what's the patient like? Because I use about 7 different fixed labs, depending on what the outcome is going to be in my mind. Now, this patient down here, they have a different set of problems. They have position problems, posterior support problems, but ultimately the foundational problem is going to make us at least have a significant amount of extractions, and the patient's wishes are going to have some implants. So we're not only going to need our lab support, but we're going to have surgical support, and then start pairing the patient's wants and their personality with the right specialist to have on our team. And so then that's kind of where we should be thinking about it, and how do we assemble our team, at least if we're going to be driving the case. So the first person that we have to start to communicate with is the patient. And breaking it down into small bits, we can say that there's the 3 main ways to do it. There's talking, showing, and writing. So obviously the very easiest thing to do is to just sit and start talking. So this patient walks into our office, they've snapped off tooth number 7, and we talk about their different options and the patient's wants and desires and some of the limitations that they have. So this is not the actual patient, but earlier this week we were working with a patient that just wasn't getting it. we had them back, and we broke it down into just kind of bite-sized options. So you either get A, B, or C, and then you're going to also have benefits. You're going to have risks, and that kind of helps them along the way when you're communicating with the patient, because when you're working with interdisciplinary care, you always have to count the patient as one of the people that are the main players in the treatment. Now sometimes they don't get it still, and so that's when you kind of have to show them. You can show them with photographs. Um, let's see here. There we go. So, but what I've been doing ever since residencies come around is doing a lot of simulations, and I tried to use the really fancy and expensive photo editing software, and I keep coming back to just using PowerPoint. So if you guys are interested in learning how to do photo mock-ups, I'm happy to show you how I do it. So this patient came in for just one tooth at number 9. He said it looks dark, and my sister tells me I've got buck teeth. And so we said, okay, well, if we fix that, this is what it'll look like. And then we transferred it to his face and his smile. And then we said, but you know what? That's really not going to fix your buck teeth. The problem that you're having is that your laterals are actually undersized. And we would recommend that you probably address those as well. And so we kind of mocked them up like this, and then we showed it what it would look like in his smile. And obviously we could keep going down the line and telling them what would be the best that we see. But just actually having him see what this will be in his mouth really made him understand that this one tooth problem is really not solved by just one tooth. So we know now, working from what we have in mind, where we're going to be, that we are going to be working with shape and size. And so we're going to be really utilizing our lab support in this type of a case. So this is one of my treatment letters, and everybody has their own way of doing it. I've seen other people's treatment letters come in, and especially for the patients, I think it's important to have these 3 components. Initially you go, well, what am I supposed to say to this patient? There's just so much to do. I just start with what I see and just restate what we talked about and what we saw at our exam. And then we go ahead and start to talk about their options. I try to keep them into small bite-sized scenarios. And then if they're interested, then I can expand out each scenario. But if you just restate the goal and attach it to plan A, B, or C, and the patients really just want to know, okay, well, why would I do this one versus another one? And ultimately, it comes down to time and money that helps them decide where they're going for. And then in the last couple of years, I've really made sure that I always touch on what's the next step. We've lost a couple of patients in the whole workup because we say, okay, here's your wonderful plan. This is going to fix your problems, and that's great. And then we don't hear from them, and they just said, well, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I got the letter, and that's it. So I always like to tell them, if you're interested, this is what you're going to do. Just call us, and we'll set up the appointment. But that number 3 one has been something that we've added in the last couple of years. So ultimately, we want to improve our communications by just restating some of the concise scenarios that we have for the patient. So don't worry about, is it going to be Emax? Is it going to be zirconia? What are we going to do? Kind of big picture things, let them make a choice and then expand from there. And then always reconnect onto their why. Why are they going to go through all of this work, spend all of this money? Because if they feel like they're getting something from all of this along the way, it really makes them, not burn out along the way. So just for fun, we can go through what we did for this patient here. She obviously wanted something back in there that's fixed. She doesn't really have the option to have a bridge because number 6 is an implant. So we went for an implant. Now, we were about to get going, and she said, "You know what? I really don't want to go through another implant. It was just a pain, but I really want something fixed." So we thought for it a little bit, and we decided to do a cantilever fixed implant. And we went through the different steps with provisionalization, converted it into a custom impression coping, ended up with a very decent result in relatively low amount of treatment time, and actually lower cost than what it would have cost for another implant. But we kind of did the same thing that we talked about. We begun with the end in mind. We know we wanted fixed. We know we wanted her to not spend too much time in the surgeon's office, and then we were able to work backwards with our scheme this way and have our objectives along the way. So let me take a quick pause before we go into the next stage here. Are there any questions, or anybody want to add their own experience to what we've been discussing? I don't know how to see if anybody's. No. Everybody awake?
Go ahead and raise your hand via the feature. You go to participants and hover over your name and click on more. You'll be able to raise your hand. Oh. No, you don't have to hover over more. Just raise your hand is at the bottom when you click on participants.
Okay, so I'm going to assume then there's no hands raised. So this part here, we get to talk a little bit more about lab support and specialties. This is the ortho portion of the little talk. So something a little different when working with colleagues is instead of, you definitely still have to do your writing and your letters, but sometimes you actually have to do some of the work and let them know what you have in mind as well. So let's go right to the ortho part. So this is a patient that came into our office, and they said, "Well, I hear you do bonding of people's teeth, direct bonding. So I've got the perfect patient for you. We've closed up the spaces, and he's ready for bonding." And we kind of thought about what things are going to look like, and we said, "Well, there's going to be a big problem." And they said, "Well, what are you talking about? The midlines are perfect. The spaces are closed. What are we going to do?" So I actually drew this out on a piece of paper, but we'll see if it works here. So this is kind of where we were with the patient starting off. And what the orthodontist was envisioning is that we just put some composite on there and close things up. And what was worse is I think they wanted me to only do it with 2 teeth, and so it would look really weird and have these long cantilever sections over there that would become a plaque trap. And you can see from this young patient's home care is it's not great to begin with. So we said, you know, that's not going to be the best option for the patient, both hygienically and aesthetically. What really should be happening is starting off from where you are to redistribute all of the teeth along the arch, and I would then have small composites done on each of the edges there, and then you'd have a much better result aesthetically and hygienically. And they said, "Well, that means we're going to have to go back through ortho." And then we said, "Yeah, that's what's going to have to happen." And so they did. And this is where they ended up several months later. And ideally, I'd love to have the central incisors slightly wider apart than they are now. But you know, from where we started, this turned out really nice. And the patient was debonded and debracketed, and we were able to end up with a decent result. So unfortunately, we got involved, you know, midway through, where if we were to have been able to start to drive some of this treatment, we would be able to have saved the patient a little bit more time. But ultimately, they ended up with a decent result that achieved all of their goals. Okay, so when from a restorative standpoint, when you like to work with orthodontists, the biggest thing that I've found is to have a good way of communicating what the final shape is going to be, and let the orthodontist move the teeth to match that area. So I get wonderful letters talking about they're going to be using finger springs, C chains, this and that. I don't really know what that means, and so I just say, "Can you get the teeth there?" And that's usually a yes or no answer, and then we have that as our objectives. And then I always want to know the treatment time. So when can I start to do my part? So that unfortunately wraps up our ortho part of everything. I'm going to drop into surgical guidance, and there's different ways of doing it depending on your tech level. So this is actually a part that we did back in residency. And so you're not going to see much tech involved at this part. Later on, you'll see a little bit more technology being used. So ultimately, what needs to be communicated to the surgeon? Well, it's a little different in a fixed case and a removable case. So a fixed case, you basically just need to tell them the dimensions: the buccolingual dimension, the mesial distal dimension, and then also the apical position of the implant. And ultimately, that is related and correlated to the rough outline of the final restoration. This will help them have the final angulation to have the access channel come out in the correct place for implants. But removable, you get a little bit more forgiveness. And rather than all of those points being communicated, you will need more of a rough outline and an acceptable range of where they can put the implants. So it's something like this, and the best way to communicate something with somebody that has removable case is pretty much doing it in a duplicated version of their denture, and then physically give that to the surgeon, and then they know that if they put their burr through those holes, we're going to have a good result at the end. So let's make it very simple. We'll talk about the chain of command. Coming from a restorative practice, we kind of have a vision on where these teeth are supposed to be, and we make a proposal. The surgeon helps say, well, with my knowledge of biology and what the patient is presenting with, this is what we should do. We do an imaging version of some sort, and then both sides get to weigh in again and make sure that they're happy. And once everybody is on the same page, you actually do the treatment. So the beginning with the end in mind is done definitely through implant dentistry, but with multiple, a surgeon and a restorative person here, there needs to be a lot of discussions going on and agreement on both sides. So this was all the way back in residency. We were going to go ahead and put in tooth number 18. So we visualized what the final product was going to look like, and it was going to look something like this. We built that into a radiographic stent. So the technical parts of this, if you're interested in it, we can talk about it at a different time. But the radiographic stent was made. And that's not exactly the right one, but it looks something like that. So from then, we went ahead and did a CT scan. And back then, this was high tech because we just went over to ortho and borrowed some of their tracing paper and traced on top of it. And let's make things a little bit more simple. And this is kind of what we were looking at. So my proposed treatment of the tooth was given to where the surgeon got to see where we're going to be. And we said, well, this is where I'd like things to be, which means that this is where the implant's going to be. Is this going to look good for you? And the surgeon at the time, they said, that's great, but you're getting kind of close to the distal root of the molar in front of it. So I'd probably tip it a little bit, something like this. That's great, but now I'm looking at where my screw access channel would be, and that's going to make the porcelain really thin on the mesial part, and I don't like that. So we're going to move it back. And the patient and the surgeon thought that was great. We were able to talk about exactly what type of implant, the size of the implant, everything was great, green lighted, and so we were able to have our surgical objectives. We're going to do an 18 single tooth implant. We knew what our components were, so everything was ordered ahead of time. And we knew that there's going to be a slight mesial tip to the placement. So everybody was on the same page before the patient even opened their mouth during the surgery. So this is what it looked like. Dr. Maki Narita was the surgeon. She's down in Los Angeles now. She did her pilot drill, tipped it over, just like we did in the simulation, and the implant went together. So it's really satisfying when the plan comes together. Everything that you're expecting does happen. And we were just residents at this time, and we even made it work. So that was great. So surgically, again, we're just talking about ways to communicate the final position and the final shape, and expectations were set by both parties. And then finally, I like to hear just, estimated healing times. Again, as the restorative person, the last person that's going to touch this patient, I want to know when I can get started. So that's really big for me. So I know what we're up against and when I get to take over. So this is the boring slide about lab communication, but there's so much that goes into it. And this is really what I've been spending a lot of time trying to get better and better at. And it all really comes down to the same thing, just ways to communicate what you have in your mind to the technician. But the additional thing for lab technicians is each of them are an artist, and you wouldn't want a sculptor doing a painting, and you wouldn't want a film director doing graphic arts or something like that. You want to make sure that they're working in the best medium that they work with. So the way that we go through it is with photographs. Really couldn't do the dentistry that we do without using these photographs. They've been trying to get away with screen grabs lately for the digital dentistry. I still would rather feel the teeth, get to see how they're moving around, because there's a lot, especially in the articulation, the movements, that you just can't do digitally. I know they're working on it. They say they have it. I do a lot of the digital stuff, but ultimately it doesn't beat having an articulator and wax and acrylic or stone, something like that. So this is one of the lab cases that was kind of fun to do. Just to show you how silly I can get, we decided to do veneers. The teeth were heavily stained on one of them, and there was a single unit implant in another. So we're mixing pretty much 3 different canvases, and we're trying to get a final result. So I go through all of this. I use a master ceramist that's down in San Diego. I send it all out and go through a lot of hoops to communicate what we're looking for. And then I actually presented this at my other study club, and they said, well, why didn't you just do PFMs on everything? And I said, oh, yeah, that would have worked well. But she ended up with a good result. We didn't potentially need to use our master ceramist and go through all of these complex steps, but he did it. But yeah, we could have done PFMs or PFCs and ended up with probably a very similar nice result. So, but we did kind of end with this, the objectives met. And unfortunately, she would never give me a really nice smile after they went in. She kind of gave me this fish face. But maybe one day I'll get a nice picture of her, and then I can do some nitpicking on how we could have done this better. So that was a fast way of going through the laboratory stuff. But I really like this, especially being a prosthodontist. We used to do a lot of our own lab work. So I really like it, and ways to communicate the vision and the expectations, and then also trying to figure out which lab person does the best that they can do. So I'd love to hear who you like to use for your aesthetic front tooth cases, the back teeth, because it doesn't matter how good they are. I think there's always room for another person on the team, especially when it comes to laboratory stuff. All right, so let's go through a case here. Now this one's a bit complex, and the patient really comes in with a few definites that they want to have happen. So they wanted to replace some missing teeth. They only wanted fixed solutions, and he really, really wants white teeth. I think he's on the hunt for a wife or something like that, or a girlfriend. So this is where he started off, and we went through the steps of envisioning what we want things to look like. We did our photo mock-ups, and then we realized that we really don't have room for all 4 teeth down there. Things are going to have to be smaller. And we realized that an implant will not be able to be placed in the number 7 spot because of the defect that's remaining. So we assemble our team. We know we're going to need a surgeon. We're going to need lab support, and we need the patient to understand what we're going to be doing. So we do everything that we just talked about. Now, instead of the lab fabricated model-based surgery, we did do digital in this case. And if I'm being completely honest, I think the lab was trying to drive this. And unfortunately, you can't tell, but those teeth are way undersized for what his smile was. So the lab technician didn't think that was an issue, but he thought this was a good outcome. So what we ended up having to do is, I went back to what we do in residency is actually set teeth on the cast. And so we made a mock-up, and we were able to convert that into acrylic. We painted on a little bit of gums to just see what that'll look like. And then we let him go for a few months. And the photographs of this were sent to the lab. Even parts of the gum tissue, we were able to paint on another sample and send that into the lab. So ultimately, this is where we came in. And unfortunately, this guy smokes a lot, and so all of his provisionals and all of his teeth on delivery day were really dark. So this hopefully everybody goes, oh god, that looks horrible. They missed the shade. That's actually the shade of the acrylic that was on the upper 8 teeth that we worked with. And unfortunately, we're supposed to cement this, and I was going to get a final picture, but his truck broke down. So this is kind of that failure to take a nice picture and make his provisionals get bright again and get a really good, mid-treatment picture. So, but you can see what the lab told us was going to work out well and where we ended. And well, they kind of look the same. I don't believe that the digital mock-ups are the same as what we end up with or what you can do in a stone in acrylic manner for that. And then the really nice thing is that we took pictures all the way along the way, and so we wanted to make sure that did we achieve his goal? Well, yes, it was fixed. He replaced teeth, and goodness gracious, it was pretty darn white. So everything on his side was checked. He's pretty happy. As soon as he gets his truck fixed, we're going to go ahead and finish up the uppers. And we went through all of the steps with the surgeon and the lab. And then we've actually sat down and talked about ways that we were going to change that the next time we get a nice case like this. So that's really important, and that's another kind of tenet of the 7 habits of highly effective people, is to sharpen your saw. And if you keep working with the team, you're going to act kind of like a neuron and build in some really good connections between them, and it becomes more effortless and easy. I know I work with a core group of specialists, especially with difficult cases, and that really makes the difficult cases much easier when you just know each other's style. You know what you're gonna get when you're working with certain specialists in the team. And so I think this is a very good endorsement for why you should be working in interdisciplinary teams, um, just to make things work better and stronger and faster. So I think we'll just end with this patient here. Their wants were to replace missing teeth, to have better function. He wasn't in any pain. He actually took decent care of his teeth, but he wanted to have improved aesthetics. And he's already talked to an orthodontist at this point, and they're telling him the only way to fix him is jaw surgery, but he wants to explore other options from this. So given all of his wants, we did the workup, and we were noting that he's going to definitely need some orthodontics. He's going to need some surgery, and some pretty nice lab work is going to be required for this. So he's actually an engineer type. He really wants to understand things before taking the next step. So we went ahead and demonstrated what will happen. So this is where he started. We told him, okay, we're going to go ahead and do some buildups. We're going to make the teeth kind of teeth-like again, and then orthodontics will be done. And we're going to take your tiny little arch here, and we're going to make it a regular arch and make spaces for implants in the laterals. The laterals are going to go in. We're going to make a nice temporary that goes over the top of that, or a provisional. And we're going to have to make it pretty bulky enough so that the surgeon can tug on it, take it on and off, and it won't break. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and provisionalize the rest of the teeth. And then when everything is worked out, phonetics and function, we'll turn it into really nice porcelain in multiple steps. So this is an interesting thing that I've been doing since we've actually had patients wanting these big cases but not fully being able to afford it all at once. Is if you spend the time on doing the provisionalization, you can technically do it one tooth at a time if you wanted to. Now I'll spoil this and say that we're not actually done with his treatment, but I will show you a patient that will be similar to this, and the same thing for her. We're taking off little chunks, but she's been able to be provisionalized, and we're testing everything out along the way. So for the lower, it's something similar, but with the input of our surgeons, we were going to be making a space for a bridge, because the implant wouldn't go in that tiny little spine of a ridge that he had. And then we'd move the other teeth forward on the other side. We told them this is what a bridge looks like, and ultimately we'll provisionalize and then turn that into some really nice porcelain. So this is really the detailed steps along the way, and with the objectives. And you can literally print this out and have little check marks at the end of each of these phases. So it was really important in the beginning not to make his teeth look perfect, but really kind of have the final shape of the teeth. So the ortho that's done can now move these teeth into the correct position. And then we had our objectives for our orthodontic movement. We changed it into a new provisional for the front teeth. And again, we were really worried that he was going to snap the plastic since it's going to be taken on and off multiple times. The implants were going to go in, and we told the surgeon, we'd love screw retain, but if you don't think it could happen because of the scans, let us know that so we can kind of plan from that. full provisionalization, test things out, make sure the patient likes it, and then convert to porcelain. And then finally, we would always have this as be the last step. You got to have long-term maintenance and protect the investment. And then it also allows you to have follow-up and feedback for the cases that come up. So, all right, so we've conceptualized everything. Let's see how it ended up. So the initial bonding of the teeth, well, it went something like that. So he, knowing the steps, knew that, okay, midlines are not going to be perfect. Yep, there's going to be spaces in there, but the rough outlines of what the teeth are supposed to look like are done. Orthodontic movement was done very well and without surgery. And finally, we were able to take the braces off, and this is where we started, or the restorative team got to start, and we ended up making a nice, robust provisional. That went on, and implants went in. Okay, and so we went through the whole planning procedure for that, but something happened that sometimes happens in implant dentistry. The implant failed. And so just because we had a linear stepwise plan for him, that doesn't necessarily mean we go to the next step. We just had to go back a step and go back to implant placement. And so unfortunately, that's where he was about 9 months ago. And then the implant came out and COVID hit, and so he just had the implant placed last week. And so I know that's kind of not very satisfying to see the end case. So as promised, here's the patient. Pretend that the implants went in, teeth need to be reconstructed. Okay, so now we got them all in provisionals. And then so this patient is one that we're doing 3 teeth at a time every 6 months. And it makes things really, really nice from a business standpoint, because I can count on 3 crowns every 6 months. And basically what I do is I knock off the provisionals, I clean the margins, give them a quick scan, and there's 3 crowns. So I really like these cases where we put all the effort in the beginning, and then it kind of works its way along for the next several years. So that's a lot of information all at once. I'm sure it's common sense and everybody's doing it the same, but or at least a variation of it. But just to summarize, when you're working in interdisciplinary care, we want to optimize the team dynamics. And if you are the control person, you like to drive treatment, make sure you assemble your team to make the best outcome that you can. Obviously, begin with the end in mind and find a way to connect to the patient's why, and keep reinforcing that along the way. Once you have the end in mind, work on communicating your final vision. I can tell you the people that I work with are probably the people that I communicate the best with, and I feel like we have a nice mutual understanding on what our expectations are. And ultimately, the patients feel that, and they just have a really good experience along some of these, years-long treatments. So when we do have our objectives for each of the parties involved, it does allow us to have feedback and accountability. It's always a little tough for me when an orthodontist says, okay, I've moved the teeth, is it ready for the implant? I go, well, you know where the teeth are supposed to be, and you know that there needs to be at least 7 millimeters, and the roots need to be open and stuff like that. You know when we're done, but I'll take a look at it, no problem. And so when we have our expectations like that, then the accountability is there, and people say, yep, we're ready to go. So I like that. And then each time we do a successful case, it's great to show it, even if it's not so successful. It's great to show it. And then continue to improve every case. Even if it's a single tooth, if you document it and share it with the people involved or just friends, I guarantee you're going to get better and better each time. and start thinking about things that you can make things faster, better, and more enjoyable. So that's how I've been working on it. Again, it may be different in 5 years from now, but currently that's the way that I like to tackle more complex care cases, and maybe not just complex dental cases, but just complex interdisciplinary situations. All right, I think that's it. Let's see.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Please go ahead and raise hands if you'd like to ask questions or any comments.
Let me see, what am I doing?
So we have Dawn. Go ahead, Dawn.
I'd like to find out the case where you treated the 4 upper incisors, including 1 implant and 1 veneer, I believe. How did you temporize that case?
Oh, yeah. Let me see. Am I still sharing the case or the screen at all?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Let me go back to it then. Here we go. So the upper right, picture is the temporization. What we did is we had 7, 8, and 9 as connected, and then number 10 being an implant that was just a screw retained provisional. If I was being really saucy, I could have made them all individuals and test her anterior guidance and all sorts of things like that. But I was pretty confident that there wasn't going to be any issues with overloading the front teeth. So that actually turned out decent. Did that answer the question, or
Yes. Second question on that: did you make the 2 teeth veneers to keep an occlusal stop or anterior guidance?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that one. What I tend to like to do is have some sort of an occlusal stop on the anterior teeth and not just have it too sloped. So they do have this nice feeling that they're in the right place. Even if they don't like it, I still make the case so that they do have a nice vertical stop on the cingulums. And then once it's all cemented in and I know the case is the way that we planned it with the dots, I shave back the cingulum after that. But it's just really challenging when you have these kind of cingulum-less centrals, and then they bite down, it kind of shoves their jaw in a different position, and you just never know if you actually got it or not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Kenny, I have a question for you.
Okay.
That case that you showed where the orthodontist created the anterior spacing, they spaced out, they spread out 7 to 10 to create better spacing, and then you did composite bonding.
Yes.
Yeah, that case. If you go to the finished product, your slide with the finished bondings,
Mm-hmm.
I think your next slide where you had the spacing. Yeah. Do you think that that 7 and 10 would have a better aesthetic outcome if they were mesialized more? Do you think you have too much space on the mesial and not it's more, the 2 should have been more mesial, 7 and 10?
Not really. Actually, the challenge that I had with this patient is the laterals are so so square, so squatty compared to where the centrals and the canines were. If this was an adult, we would probably do some gum surgery, and I think that would have made the aesthetic harmony look better. Mathematically, I think that this is a decent positioning. I'd actually want the centrals closer to the laterals, have the zenith look better, and yeah, I should have gotten a better picture. But really, I think it's the height that was the issue, rather than if the laterals were closer in. I think then we would have to either extend the composites distally or extend the canines mesially. And we didn't actually even touch the canines in this case.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, we have a hand. Alexa, go ahead.
Hi, Kenny. A very nice presentation. I'm interested actually in that same case Sarah brought up. This is our fun stuff we do. I'm wondering if you prefer to have more space, get the teeth in the right size, and then us as orthodontists, like provisionally, do some bonding to get the right size, and then us as orthodontists close the space, and then you do the final restoration. What do you think about that?
Academically, yeah, I love that. And practically, you know, I always tell patients when they come back from ortho, I say ortho is like driving a cruise boat. It's really tough to do the, you know, 1/4 of a millimeter movements, but I can do that pretty easily with prosthetics. So what I'm playing around with now is just like what you're talking about, and digitally making the almost like a provisional on top of them, so lab fabricated composites, and they are exactly the same size. And then I think something like that would allow everybody to, you know, put them on beforehand and then close the spaces. But yeah, when we're doing direct, I definitely can make these tiny little changes much easier, I feel, than we can do orthodontically. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It's harder to do it orthodontically. That's why I was thinking of that.
Well, there was a story where their patient, she was working with somebody to get the canine to drop, and she was working 2.5 years. And I go, well, why don't I just make it a little longer in composite? I'll show you what it looks like. And it just puts them with my thumb. And then and she goes, oh my God, I could have done that in 2 minutes, and rather than 2.5 years. Oh, I guess you could. I'm sorry, but you know, it would have been better if it was her tooth. But yeah, it was nice.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anybody else? Any comments, feedback?
You can be brutally honest and say you didn't like some of the work. Looking at it over and over again, making the presentation, there's some things I'm like, oh God, that doesn't look good. So, or how you would have done it differently would probably be more constructive, but I can take it.
I think, Kenny, it was a beautiful presentation. It was just such a perfect intro to what this study club is going to be about. I think Jackie has her hand raised. Go ahead.
So in the case where they had recommended to do the surgery for that narrow arch, I mean, he also seemed like he had a pretty deep bite. So kind of along the question that Alexa had, would you help the orthodontist open the bite by putting some provisionals on at some point during the treatment to open the vertical, or how do you feel about managing some of those cases along the way?
Absolutely. So I would probably, my feeling, especially knowing how long ortho can take an adult sometimes, is I'd rather do a little bit of direct bonding rather than provisionalization. I'm always a little wary of having provisionals on that long, and sometimes, you know, losing the patient for a year or two. But yeah, I mean, if some of the objectives were to open up the bite and do things that way, I think that would be a great idea.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think in my experience, I found that to be a real accelerator, especially on really deep bite cases. Those are like big time sinks for the orthodontist. So if we can get some help restoratively to open up those dimensions, that's super helpful.
Yeah, so that's just like the example that we had in the surgery case, where I'm not even thinking about the distal sweep of the root. I'm just saying this is where I want the tooth and the access channel, and then the surgeon said, "Hey, you know what? This would make my life easier if we did this." So that's where I love the collaboration, with all the people in the team. And they say, this would cut off, potentially a couple of months of treatment, and this is all I need you to do. Excellent. I'm happy to do it.
Great. Great presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.